The rain was already bad when the dog started screaming. It wasn't a bark, it was something rawer than that, the kind of sound that cuts through walls and weather and the general noise of a hospital trying to keep people alive. Lena Whitmore heard it from the ER supply corridor, dropped the IV bag she was restocking, and pushed through the back exit into the downpour without thinking twice. Behind Redwood Valley Medical Center's loading dock, a stray, brown and matted, one back leg bent wrong, was dragging itself through the mud toward the drainage grate. Nobody else had come out. Nobody else would. Lena knelt in the rain and reached for him, and that's when the gate at the far end of the alley slammed open and a military canine, massive, leashed but barely, locked onto her and lunged. The handler shouted. Staff standing at the ambulance bay froze. Everyone braced for the moment those jaws found her arm. Instead, the dog stopped 6 inches from her face, made a sound low in his chest, and dropped to the wet concrete at her feet, trembling, like something broken inside him had just clicked back into place. Nobody in that alley understood what they were seeing. The nurse crouching in the rain with a stray in her arms, and a military working dog pressed against her knees, shaking. Nobody could explain it. But the dog knew exactly who she was. He'd been waiting 8 years to find her again. If this story already has you hooked, stay with me until the very end. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The shift had started the way most of Lena's shifts started, with her being talked over. She'd arrived at Redwood Valley Medical Center at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before her 7 o'clock start, because she always did. She changed in the locker room, tied her dark hair back, pulled her scrub sleeves down over the patchwork of scar tissue that ran from her left wrist to just below the elbow, and walked out onto the ER floor before the overnight nurse had finished her last coffee. The ER at Redwood Valley was mid-sized and perpetually understaffed, 40 beds, a trauma bay that handled more than it was built for, and a nursing rotation that turned over fast enough that Lena, at 34, was considered one of the veterans. She'd been there 6 years, long enough to know which doctors actually listened and which ones used the nursing staff as a buffer between themselves and the hard decisions. Dr. Victor Hale was the latter, and he ran the surgical wing like a private kingdom. He was tall, gray-templed, the kind of confident that came from decades of being told he was exceptional. His residents worshipped him, and his peers deferred to him, and the hospital administration treated his opinions like policy. He had a way of looking through nurses rather than at them. Not malicious exactly, just absent, as if they were furniture that occasionally handed him things. Lena had worked under his rotation for 2 years. In that time, he had learned her name once and forgotten it twice. She didn't take it personally, or she told herself she didn't. The morning moved fast. 2 chest pains, 1 pediatric respiratory, a farm equipment injury that required her to improvise with the supplies on hand while waiting for the surgical team. She was good at that, improvising, staying calm in the gap between what was available and what was needed. It was a skill she'd developed before Redwood Valley, in conditions that made their understaffed ER look like a spa, but she never mentioned that. She just did the work. Around 9:30, the trauma bay got complicated. The patient was a man named Doyle, 50-something, construction, brought in after a scaffolding collapse. He'd taken a rebar strike to the left flank, blunt trauma, possible internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping in a way that made Lena's jaw tighten the moment she read the paramedic's handoff. She got him stabilized, ran the initial workup, and flagged it for surgical consult before the attending had even finished their rounds. Dr. Hale arrived 18 minutes later, reviewed her notes, and immediately called for a repeat assessment. His pressure's improving, Hale said, flipping through the tablet without looking at the patient. We'll observe. Lena stood at the foot of the bed. His last 2 readings are trending down again, not up. The improvement was a single data point. I think we should consider exploratory. I didn't ask for your interpretation, Whitmore. He handed the tablet back without breaking stride. Observation. I'll be back in an hour. She watched him walk out. Doyle looked at her, the kind of look patients gave when they'd heard enough to be scared. Is he right? Doyle asked. Quiet, trying not to let it shake him. Lena kept her face even. We're going to keep a close eye on you. She documented everything, every reading, every timestamp, every clinical concern with her reasoning attached. It was a habit she'd had since before nursing school. Record what happened, record what you did about it, record why. She'd learned that lesson in an environment where the debrief could determine whether you kept your job or faced a court of inquiry, and it had transferred well to civilian medicine. 40 minutes later, Doyle's pressure dropped hard. She called the code before the monitor alarm even finished its second cycle, had the crash cart at bedside while the overhead page was still echoing, and was running the resuscitation by the time Hale came back through the door. He took over. Of course he did. He was the attending, it was his call, and he was competent. She knew that much, whatever else she thought of him. They got Doyle stabilized and into emergency surgery within the hour. He'd live. Afterward, Hale found her at the nursing station. She expected acknowledgement, or at least the absence of blame. She got neither. Your initial assessment delayed appropriate escalation, he said, voice low, the kind of quiet that was somehow louder than shouting. I've documented my concerns about your clinical judgment on this case. Lena looked up from the chart she was updating. I flagged him for surgical consult in my first note, 19 minutes after admission. You flagged. You didn't escalate. There's a difference. He straightened his coat. This isn't the first time we've had issues with your assessments. I'll be speaking to nursing administration. He left. She sat with it for a moment, the specific burn of being blamed for a thing you'd tried to prevent. And then she went back to the chart. A younger nurse named Petra, 2 years on the floor and still surprised by things, drifted over during a quiet moment. That wasn't fair, she said, voice just above a whisper. No, Lena agreed. Are you going to say something? To admin? Lena pulled up the next patient's file. I documented everything. Petra waited, like there was more coming. There wasn't. The military transport arrived at 11:20 without any advance notice, which was unusual, and carrying a wounded K-9 unit, which was unusual in a different way. Redwood Valley wasn't a VA facility. They occasionally treated veterans, same as any ER, but active military cases routed through the federal medical system. Whatever had brought this particular situation through their doors had bypassed normal channels, which meant something had gone sideways somewhere up the chain. Lena was finishing a suture when she heard the commotion at the ambulance bay. Raised voices, boots on the floor, the specific controlled urgency sound of people who were used to emergencies trying to navigate an unfamiliar system. She tied off the last stitch, told her patient to keep it clean and come back in a week, and walked toward the noise. There were 4 of them. 3 in uniform, Army combat medic patches on 2 of them, the 3rd wearing captain's insignia, and a 4th in civilian clothes who was clearly moving to accommodate an injury, one arm held close to his body. On a transport gurney between them, a Belgian Malinois, brown and black, muzzled and sedated but uneasy, moving his head in slow arcs even under the medication. The captain was doing the talking. He was maybe 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been through weather. Not old exactly, just used. A scar ran from the corner of his jaw down toward his throat, old enough to have faded silver. We need a trauma bay, he was saying to the charge nurse at the desk. He's got a laceration to the left shoulder, possible rib involvement. We've been managing it in transit, but he needs imaging, and he needs it now. Sir, this is a human medicine facility, the charge nurse, Marcus, was explaining with the careful patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. We're not equipped for veterinary. He's a military working dog. He's got federal classification, and the nearest veterinary trauma center is 40 minutes out. He doesn't have 40 minutes. The captain's voice didn't rise. It got more precise. I'm not asking you to perform surgery. I'm asking you to stabilize him until transport can be arranged. Lena stepped into the gap. What's his weight? She asked. The captain turned. He was mid-response to Marcus, and she'd interrupted without raising her voice, and the shift in his attention was immediate. She'd said it with the tone of someone who intended to do something with the answer. 72 pounds, he said. How long since he was sedated? 40 minutes, maybe 45. What did you use? One of the medics answered. Dosage, medication, timing. Lena processed it, did the math in her head. He'll be coming up in the next 20 minutes, she said. If the shoulder wound is deeper than it looks on the surface, that's going to get difficult fast. She looked at Marcus. Trauma Bay 2 is open. I'll need the portable ultrasound and... She glanced at the medics. Tell me what you've already got in him. IV access, fluids, everything. Marcus started to say something about protocols. She was already moving. She didn't ask permission exactly. She asked for information, and then she acted on it. And somewhere in there, permission had been implied. It was a habit she'd developed in places where asking first sometimes meant asking too late. The dog's name, she learned from the handler who jogged alongside the gurney, was Ranger. 8 years old, 7 in active service, currently assigned to a training unit after a rotation overseas. He'd been injured in a vehicle accident 3 hours ago, the same accident that had put the civilian, who turned out to be the captain's contracted driver, in the adjacent bay. He hates strangers, the handler said. He was younger than the captain, nervous in the specific way of someone responsible for a living thing that was now hurt. He's going to come up out of sedation, and he doesn't know this place, and I know, Lena said. She pulled on gloves, positioned herself at the dog's head. What's his command word for calm? We use rest, but I don't know if he'll rest, Lena said, low, even, directly into the dog's ear. Ranger's movement slowed. Not stopped, he was still cycling up from the sedation. But the frantic head-arcing eased, replaced by something more uncertain. The handler stared at her. Timing, she said, not looking up. He's disoriented. They calm down faster if you anchor them early. She began a methodical check of the wound, deeper than surface, as she'd suspected, and the rib concern was real, a hairline fracture from the impact, not displaced but painful. She called for imaging, got it faster than she expected, because the captain had apparently made his classification status very clear to the radiology team. She worked quickly, carefully, talking to no one in particular, quiet running commentary, the kind she slipped into when she was focused, narrating what she was seeing and what she was doing. It was a habit from years of having to verbally document in conditions where written records weren't possible. She was halfway through cleaning and packing the shoulder wound when the sedation started wearing off faster than expected. Ranger came up fast, body tensing, muzzle straining, a low sound building in his chest that had all 3 medics stepping back instinctively. Lena didn't step back. She moved closer, pressed her forearm gently against the dog's neck, not restraining, just present, and said, "Rest," again, the same tone, the same cadence. Ranger went rigid for one long second, then he turned his head and looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not the glassy confusion of a dog emerging from sedation, but something more deliberate. He was reading her, his nostrils worked, his ears came forward. And then, slowly, he stopped fighting the table. The handler made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The captain, Captain Cole Mercer, she'd read on the incident report, had been standing near the door throughout, giving her space to work, watching with the focused quiet of someone taking careful inventory. When the dog went still, he moved forward and crouched down to eye level with Ranger, putting one hand lightly on the dog's flank. Ranger acknowledged him, but his eyes stayed on Lena. He's never done that, the handler said. With a stranger. That's not something he does. Some dogs are good readers, Lena said. She went back to the wound. She didn't offer anything else. She had a job to finish, and she was going to finish it. But she felt Cole Mercer looking at her. Not in the way Hale looked at her. Through her, as if she were part of the background. This was different, specific, like he was trying to place something. She kept her sleeves down, but at some point, reaching across the instrument tray, adjusting her position, the left one rode up, just an inch, just enough. She pulled it back down, didn't look up. Cole said nothing, but she heard his breathing change. Dr. Hale found her afterward, when she was writing up the interim care notes to transfer with Ranger to the veterinary trauma facility. A word, he said. She followed him into the hallway, already knowing the shape of the conversation. You treated a dog, he said. I stabilized a federal working animal while transport was arranged. He was in acute distress and would have destabilized before the veterinary unit could reach. Using our supplies, our equipment, our staff time, Marcus was present and sanctioned the use of Trauma Bay 2. The imaging department ran one set of films. The supply cost was negligible. She kept her voice level. The animal would have deteriorated significantly in the time it would have taken to... That's not the point. Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice. The point is that you keep making unilateral decisions that aren't yours to make. The Doyle situation this morning. This. You have a pattern, Whitmore, and it's becoming a liability problem for this department. The Doyle documentation clearly shows... I've already spoken to Nurse Manager Reyes. We're pulling you from primary trauma assignments for the rest of the week, pending a performance review. He straightened. This is not a punishment. It's a corrective measure. She looked at him for a moment. All right, she said. He seemed to expect more, argument or distress, or at least the kind of visible upset that would confirm he'd landed something. She gave him none of it. She went back to her notes. Petra appeared at her elbow 10 minutes later. I heard, she said. It'll be fine, Lena said. He put it in the system. Performance flag. That's on your file. I know. You're not even... Why aren't you angry? Lena thought about that. She filed the question away because it was actually a good one, and she didn't have a clean answer ready. She'd been angry, at various points in her life, at things that mattered far more than Dr. Victor Hale's performance flag. She'd learned to put it somewhere it didn't leak into her hands. It'll work itself out, she said, which was not the same as an answer. Cole Mercer came back at 2 in the afternoon. Without his team, without the urgency, just him, jeans, and a Henley, the kind of deliberately unremarkable clothing that military people sometimes wore off-duty, like camouflage for a different kind of environment. He asked for her at the nursing station by name, which she found odd, since she hadn't introduced herself. Someone had told him, or he'd found out. Petra came to get her with a look on her face that Lena couldn't entirely read. She found him in the main hallway, near the vending machines, hands in his pockets. Ranger's going to be okay, he said. Veterinary team said the notes you sent over were thorough, saved them probably an hour of initial assessment. Good, she said. I'm glad. He nodded. Didn't leave. She waited because something in his posture said this wasn't the actual thing he'd come to say. How long have you been here? He asked. At this hospital. 6 years. Before that? She watched him. Why? I'm trying to work something out, he said, and I want to do it respectfully. So I'm asking directly instead of assuming. He held her gaze. The way you worked with Ranger, the way you talked to him, the way you moved in a trauma situation. I've seen a lot of medical professionals in the field and in hospitals, and there are two kinds. People who were trained in controlled environments and people who were trained somewhere else. He paused. Your left arm. She said nothing. I'm not trying to pry, he said. The dog. Ranger has been with me for 4 years. He replaced a K9 who completed a deployment rotation right before I got him, and that unit... He stopped, recalibrated. He's not a dog who trusts easily. He's washed 3 handlers in training. The fact that he responded to you the way he did... Some dogs are just good readers, she said. Same thing she'd said in the trauma bay. Cole shook his head. No, that's not what that was. He was quiet for a moment. Were you a medic before this? The word landed between them like something heavy being set down. She'd had 6 years of this not coming up. 6 years of scrub sleeves and non-answers and the specific social contract that exists in civilian workplaces where no one asks, and you don't tell, and everyone continues existing in comfortable mutual ignorance. I need to get back to my patients, she said. Of course. He stepped back immediately, giving her the out. But something in his face had shifted. Not suspicion, not accusation. Something quieter, like a person who thinks they've just recognized something they'd thought was lost. She walked back to the floor. At 4:15, the second emergency hit, and this one she almost missed. A woman named Greta Tamblyn, 68, came in with her daughter for what was presented on the triage form as severe back pain. Lena picked up the chart at the nurse exchange, and something flagged immediately. Blood pressure asymmetry, the subtle pallor, the way the woman was holding herself. The daughter was doing most of the talking, describing a fall, describing the back, and Greta was nodding along in the specific way of someone who didn't want to make a fuss. Lena sat down across from her. Mrs. Tamblyn, can you point to where the pain is worst? The woman pointed. Central, not lateral. Not the back at all, technically. Does it go anywhere? Lena asked. The pain. Does it travel? A small pause. Down, a little, toward my stomach. Lena kept her face neutral. When did it start? This morning. I thought it was from the garden. I was bending, you know. I need to get a reading on something, Lena said. She was already reaching for the BP cuff, measuring both arms. The difference was significant. She didn't run. She moved fast, but without the kind of urgency that would alarm the daughter before she had something definitive to say. She flagged the attending, ordered imaging, and stayed with Greta while they waited, talking about nothing in particular. The garden, the daughter's kids, a recipe for something involving tomatoes that Lena would never actually make. Keeping her present, keeping her calm, watching the numbers. The imaging confirmed it, aortic dissection. Not the most common presentation, not the textbook version, and the back pain story had been doing its job obscuring the actual emergency for the past 6 hours. The attending took it from there. Lena stepped back into her supporting role and stayed there, watching the system work the way it was supposed to when someone caught the thing before it became unsalvageable. She didn't point out that she'd caught it. She wrote her clinical reasoning in the notes and moved on. But Greta's daughter stopped her in the hallway an hour later, eyes wet, holding her elbows. The doctor said if we'd waited, she couldn't finish it. He said the nurse flagged it, that's why they caught it. Was that you? A lot of people worked that case, Lena said. The daughter hugged her. It was sudden and a little awkward, and Lena patted her back and thought, obscurely, about a medical officer she'd known in a previous life who used to say that the best field medics were the ones nobody noticed until afterward. She was almost to the end of her shift when Petra found her again, and this time Petra had her phone out, turned to face Lena, showing her something. Someone filmed it, Petra said. Outside, this morning, when the dog came in. Lena looked at the screen. The angle was from the ambulance bay. Someone's phone, casual, probably started recording because military and a dog was the kind of thing people filmed without thinking. The video showed the alley, the stray, Lena crouching in the rain, and then Ranger charging and stopping and dropping at her feet. It was already at 60,000 views. The comments were what they were, speculation, projection, the internet working hard to build a story out of 15 seconds of footage. Lena handed the phone back. It's fine, she said. Lena, 60,000 views. It'll be 100,000 tomorrow and forgotten by next week. She picked up her bag. She had a stray dog recovering at the emergency vet 2 blocks over. She'd called ahead, identified herself, used some of the goodwill generated by the afternoon's events to get them to take him without a deposit she couldn't currently cover. She needed to check on him. She was 3 steps from the exit when she almost walked into Cole Mercer. He wasn't in the hallway this time. He was coming back through the main entrance, and he had 2 people with him. A woman in her 50s who carried herself with the specific authority of someone used to official spaces, and a younger man in army greens who was holding a folder of documents. Cole saw her. Something moved across his face, the recognition again, but sharper this time. I was coming to find you, he said. I'm off shift, she said. I know, this won't take long. He glanced at the woman beside him. This is Dr. Adrienne Voss from the Army Medical Command Liaison Office. She's been... He stopped, started again. There's a situation I need to explain to you. Dr. Voss extended her hand. Her grip was brief and professional. Ms. Whitmore, we have some information that's going to require your time. I know this is... She glanced at Cole. I know this is going to feel like it's coming from nowhere. Lena looked between the two of them. The folder. The way Cole was holding himself, that careful stillness again. What kind of information? She asked. Cole took a breath. Not a hesitant breath, a measured one, the kind of breath you took before saying something that mattered. 8 years ago, he said, there was a field extraction that went wrong. Lost communication, hostile contact, a building that was supposed to be clear that wasn't. He watched her face. 3 soldiers and a K9 handler were trapped. The unit command had already called it, marked the mission as lost. The hallway noise continued around them. A gurney wheel somewhere, a phone ringing at the nursing station. Someone went back in, Cole said. Twice. 3 times total. Brought everyone out. His voice was very even. The official record credits the rescue to the unit's tactical response team. But the soldiers who were in that building... He stopped. There was a woman, a medic. She didn't wait for clearance. She went in when no one else would. Lena's hand had found the strap of her bag and was holding it, not gripping, just holding. The men who survived, Cole said, they've been trying to find her for 8 years. Nobody could produce a name. The after-action reports had her listed as unidentified personnel due to a records processing error that took 4 years to surface. Cole, Dr. Voss said quietly. He looked at Lena. The careful cataloging look she'd noticed in the trauma bay, but stripped of its discretion now. You've got burn scarring on your left forearm consistent with flash exposure from an incendiary device, he said. Ranger, the K9 from that unit, responded to you the way he responds to one person. 1. In 8 years, 1. His voice dropped a register. And you knew how to calm him with a word that we stopped using in that unit's protocol in 2019. The hallway seemed quieter suddenly, or maybe she'd just stopped hearing most of it. The men you brought out of that building, Cole said, some of them are still in the army. One of them died last year, but he spent 7 of those 8 years trying to find out who she was. He paused. We need to know if it was you, and I think you already know that we already know. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Dr. Voss, at the folder, at the young soldier holding it with the uncomfortable posture of someone who understood he was witnessing something that was going to be significant later. I need to go check on a dog, she said. Cole blinked. The stray from this morning, she said. He's at the emergency vet on Caldwell. I told them I'd be there by 6. She looked at her watch. It's 5:40. If you want to continue this conversation, you can walk with me. A beat. Okay, Cole said. She pushed through the door into the evening air. Behind her, she heard the quiet scramble of 3 people falling into step. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the parking lot was still dark with it, puddles catching the last pale light. The sky, the specific bruised color that came after a bad afternoon. Lena's shoes were still wet from the morning. She hadn't had time to change them. She walked, and she said nothing, and somewhere behind her, Cole Mercer was putting together a story that she had spent 6 years very carefully not telling, and some part of her, the part that had packed the wound and carried the weight and kept the sleeves down, understood that the telling of it was now probably unavoidable. She just needed to check on the dog first. The emergency vet on Caldwell was a narrow building wedged between a laundromat and a closed-down print shop, the kind of place that stayed open late because animals didn't schedule their emergencies around business hours. Lena pushed through the glass door and the woman at the front desk looked up with the particular expression of someone who'd been expecting a person and wasn't entirely sure what to make of who'd arrived. Lena still in her scrubs, wet shoes squeaking on the linoleum, 3 people filing in behind her like a delegation that hadn't been announced. The brown terrier mix, Lena said. Brought in around noon. I called ahead. He's resting, the woman said. Dr. Okafor set the leg. He came through okay. Can I see him? A pause. Are you family? I'm the one who found him. The woman looked at the 3 people behind Lena, Cole, Dr. Voss, the young soldier whose name Lena still didn't know, and made a quiet judgment call. Give me a minute. Lena turned to face the waiting area. Cole had taken a seat. Dr. Voss remained standing. The young soldier, whose name turned out to be Specialist Tron, stood near the door holding his folder with the quiet endurance of someone used to waiting in rooms where significant things happened. You can sit, Lena told him. He sat. She leaned against the counter and looked at Cole. What was his name? Whose name? The handler. Ranger's original handler. The one who was in the building. Cole's expression shifted. Sergeant Dale Pruitt. And the others? He looked at her steadily. Corporal Amir Youssef. PFC Travis Oberg. Oberg died 14 months ago. Cardiac event. Nothing service-related. He paused. Youssef is currently stationed at Fort Harlan. Pruitt got out in 2020. He owns a garage in western Montana. Lena absorbed this without visible reaction, which took more effort than it looked. She'd spent 8 years not knowing whether any of them had made it. Not because she couldn't have found out, but because finding out would have meant acknowledging the thing she'd spent 8 years not acknowledging, and she hadn't been ready. They're alive, she said. The 2 who mattered, the 2 she'd been least sure about. They're alive, Cole confirmed. The woman came back and said the vet would let her back for 5 minutes. The dog was in a crate with his splinted leg extended and his eyes half open, the dazed but functional look of an animal that had been through something and come out the other side. He raised his head when Lena crouched in front of the crate, and his tail moved. Not a wag, more of an acknowledgement. Good job, she told him, and she wasn't entirely sure whether she was talking to the dog. She stayed the full 5 minutes. Nobody came back to get her. When she came out, Dr. Voss was on the phone in the corner, low and professional, and Cole was where she'd left him, and Specialist Tran had apparently found something to read on his phone. "There's a records issue," Lena said, sitting down across from Cole. No preamble. She'd had 5 minutes in a back room with a drugged-up terrier to decide what she was going to say and how much. "I know about the records issue." "You know." "I was told in 2018 that the after-action report had a processing discrepancy, that my name wasn't in it correctly." She kept her voice level. "I was also told that correcting it would require a formal inquiry that would take 18 months minimum and require me to re-enter the system, and that my discharge—" She stopped. "My discharge was complicated. I was trying to move forward, so I let it be." Cole was quiet for a moment. "The discharge is why we couldn't find you," he said. "You dropped off, completely. No forwarding address in the system, no service record cross-reference. Whatever the complication was, it buried your trail." "I know." "Do you want to tell me what the complication was?" "Not tonight," she said. He accepted that without pushing. She noted it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Dr. Voss is with the Army Medical Command Liaison," he said, "which means she's administrative, not investigative. She's not here to audit you or open anything you don't want opened. What we need—" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There are people. Youssef and Pruitt, and 2 others from the unit who were at the perimeter that day. They've been carrying this for 8 years, trying to figure out who to thank and not being able to. That's a specific kind of weight." He met her eyes. "I want to put it down for them." "And for you?" she asked. A beat. "I was the mission commander," he said. "I was the one who called it. I stood down, and then someone went in anyway and brought my people out." His jaw tightened. "Yeah, for me too." She looked at him. He looked back. Whatever he was looking for, she wasn't sure she was ready to give it, but she understood the asking. "Give me a few days," she said. "Of course." She stood, shouldered her bag. "Tell Dr. Voss she can close her phone call. I'm not going anywhere." The performance review notification was in her email when she got home. Formal, templated, the kind of HR language that was constructed to be unassailable on paper. Phrases like patterns of independent clinical action and failure to communicate effectively within established hierarchies that meant, in plain language, that she'd caught things Hale hadn't caught and hadn't been quiet enough about it. She read it twice, sent a 1-sentence response confirming receipt, opened the attachment, which was Hale's incident summary, and read that too. It was carefully written. She'd give him that. He hadn't said anything demonstrably false. He'd arranged true things in a sequence that implied a narrative they didn't actually support. And he'd done it in the measured, credentialed tone of someone who understood that tone was half of persuasion. The Doyle case was framed as an escalation failure. The Greta Tamblyn case wasn't mentioned at all because it didn't fit the story he was telling. She got out her own documentation. Timestamps, clinical notations, her written reasoning on both cases. It was all there, in the system, with exact times. She didn't write a response that night. She made tea, she ate something, she sat in her apartment and thought about Amir Youssef in Fort Harlan and Dale Pruitt in Montana, with a garage and whatever version of a life he'd built in the intervening years. She thought about Travis Oberg dying 14 months ago without ever knowing she'd heard his name. She thought about a burning building and a dog she hadn't seen since. Then she went to bed, because she had a 6:30 shift in the morning. Nurse manager Reyes called her in at 8. Carmen Reyes was one of the good ones, efficient, direct, protective of her team when she could be and honest when she couldn't. She'd hired Lena and she'd advocated for her in small ways over the years, ways that Lena had noticed without ever acknowledging because acknowledging them would have required a kind of interpersonal openness she wasn't practiced at. The meeting was in Reyes's office, which was glass-walled, which meant the entire floor could watch without being able to hear, which was its own particular experience. "You've seen the review flag," Reyes said. "Not a question." "Last night." Reyes folded her hands on the desk. She had the look of someone who was about to do something she found professionally unpleasant. "Dr. Hale has filed 2 incident reports tied to you in the last 24 hours. The Doyle case and the K9 situation. I can explain both." "I know you can. I've read your documentation." Reyes paused. "Your documentation is thorough, Lena. It always is. That's not the issue." "What's the issue?" A beat. "The issue is that Victor Hale sits on the departmental review committee, and the Departmental Review Committee meets in 2 weeks, and the Chief of Medicine would like to avoid—" She stopped herself. "The Chief of Medicine is concerned about the appearance of conflict between the surgical and nursing divisions. And my performance flag is the solution to that appearance. I'm not saying that. I know you're not," Lena said. "I'm saying it." Reyes looked at her steadily. "I'm pulling you from trauma rotations through the review period. You'll be on med-surg through the end of the month. After the committee meeting, assuming the review resolves—" "It'll resolve," Lena said. "I believe you. But I need to give Hale something to cool down with, or he escalates to the chief directly. And the chief—" She stopped again. "I'm buying you time, Lena. That's what this is." Lena looked at her. Reyes was not wrong, exactly. She was navigating a system with a specific kind of gravity, and she was doing it with more honesty than most would have. "All right," Lena said. "All right," Reyes repeated, like she was waiting for more. There wasn't more. Lena stood, thanked her, and went to the med-surg floor. She'd been demoted without being demoted, sidelined without paperwork that said so, and the specific architecture of it was designed so that there was nothing to formally argue against. It was the kind of institutional management that happened to people who were right about things at the wrong time, and it required a particular kind of patience to endure without either capitulating or combusting. She'd endured worse. She went and changed a patient's wound dressing and asked about his grandchildren and did her job. The hospital's social media situation metastasized on day 2. Someone had found the ambulance bay video, edited it, added context, and posted it to 3 different platforms with the caption, "Military dog recognizes ER nurse as former combat medic. The internet did the rest." By the time Lena's shift ended on Tuesday, the original clip had 4 million views across platforms, and the comments were doing what comments did. Part genuine emotional response, part speculation, part people who'd never been near a hospital or a military base explaining with confidence what they were seeing. Petra showed her a compilation someone had made that included the original video, a screenshot of the ER's staff directory with Lena's name circled, and a zoomed still frame of her left forearm, blurry but unmistakably marked. "It's everywhere," Petra said. "I see that," Lena said. Do you want me to call someone, PR, or—" "No." "Lena." "Petra." She handed the phone back. "I'm going to go finish my charting." She finished her charting. She went home. She had 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, which she didn't answer, and 1 text from Cole Mercer that read, "I saw. I'm sorry. I didn't anticipate this. Call me when you're ready." She didn't call that night. She sat with the sensation of being visible in a way she'd specifically engineered her life to avoid, the specific discomfort of being looked at by people who thought they understood what they were seeing. She knew what they saw in that video, a touching moment, a dog who remembered, a mystery. It was a clean story, a good story. The actual story was less clean. Dr. Hale found her on Wednesday morning, which told her he'd been looking. She was in the med-surg hallway, working her way through a medication distribution round, when he appeared at the far end of the corridor. He walked toward her with purpose, and she kept working because she had 8 more patients on the round, and she wasn't going to fall behind because of him. "A moment," he said, falling into step beside her. "I'm mid-round," she said. "This won't take long." He dropped his voice. "There's significant media attention currently focused on this hospital and on you specifically. I've been asked by the Chief of Medicine to understand the extent of whatever military connection you have and whether it represents a conflict of interest or a liability issue for the department." She stopped at a patient door, knocked, entered, did what she needed to do, came back out. He was still there. "Is there something specific you're asking me?" she said. "Were you a military medic?" Direct now. No framing. "I served," she said. "In what capacity?" "Medical." He watched her. The neutrality on his face had slipped slightly. She could see him recalibrating, the way people did when they realized they'd been operating on an incomplete set of assumptions. "The video is generating the kind of media interest the hospital doesn't need right now," he said. "Whatever the story is, whatever your history, it's creating an external distraction at a time when the department is already managing internal concerns." He met her eyes. "I think it would be in everyone's interest if you took some personal time. A week, maybe 2. Until the attention dies down." She looked at him for a long moment. "You mean you'd like me to leave?" she said. I mean, I'd like you to consider the optics, Dr. Hale. She kept her voice very even. You filed 2 incident reports in 24 hours, pulled me from trauma, and are now suggesting I take personal time. If you want to suspend me, there's a formal process for that. If you want to fire me, there's a process for that too. But if you're asking me to voluntarily remove myself from the floor to make a media cycle easier for you, that's not something I'm going to do. His jaw tightened. I'm offering you an option that protects your position. I have documentation on both incident cases, she said. I'm confident in my clinical record. I'm going to finish my rounds. She turned and walked to the next patient door. He didn't follow, but she felt the weight of the decision in the air behind her, the way it would be written up, the way it would be framed, the institutional machine already preparing its next move. She knocked on the door and went in. Cole Mercer was waiting for her in the hospital parking garage at the end of her shift, not in a confrontational way. He was leaning against a support pillar, hands in his pockets, the same carefully unremarkable posture as before. But there was something different in his face when she walked out, a tension that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," he said. "You said that already." "It's different now." He straightened. "Youssef is coming. He got on a plane this morning. Pruitt too. He drove through the night." Lena stopped walking. "They saw the video," Cole said. "Lena." They recognized. He paused. "Pruitt called me at midnight. He was crying. I've known Dale Pruitt for 11 years. He doesn't—" Cole stopped again, and she understood that he was trying to convey something that didn't have a clean translation. "They'll be here by tomorrow morning." She thought about that. The reality of it. Not the abstract knowledge that they were alive, that they'd made it, but the concrete fact that they would be here, in this city, wanting to look at her face. "I'm not ready for that," she said. "I know. You should have given me more time." "I know that too." He didn't apologize, not exactly, but his voice held the specific weight of someone who understood they'd made a decision that affected someone else and was owning it without minimizing it. "But I couldn't tell them not to come. I couldn't ask them to stop." She turned away, looked at the concrete wall of the garage, the low amber light of the overhead fixture, a water stain in the shape of something that didn't look like anything. "What does Pruitt know?" she said finally. "About who I am now, what I do. Just what's in the video, that you're a nurse here. Not the review, not Hale. No," she turned back. "If they come here, to this hospital, while I'm in the middle of a performance review, Hale will use it. He'll say the media circus is my doing, that I orchestrated it, that it's evidence of the judgment issue he's already flagging." Cole frowned. "Who is Hale?" She told him. Not the full version, the functional version, the shape of it, enough to convey why it mattered. He listened the way she'd noticed he listened, without interrupting, without projecting, just taking it in. When she finished, something had changed in his expression. Quieter, more deliberate. "He put you on corrective review," Cole said, "while you were the one who caught the things he missed. I can't prove he missed them. I can only prove what I did." "Can you prove what you did?" "I have timestamps and clinical documentation on both cases." She paused. The Tamblyn case he didn't even include in his report, I think because it was too clearly a catch. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dr. Voss has some reach within hospital administrative structures. Not authority, but reach. If there are records that are being selectively used, I don't want it fixed that way," she said. He looked at her. "What way?" "Military intervention, external pressure. I don't want to win it like that." She held his gaze. "I built a record here, 6 years. I'll defend it with what I built, not with who I used to be." Cole studied her. "Those aren't separate things," he said quietly. "Who you used to be and who you are now." She had no answer for that. It was the most uncomfortable truth he'd said so far, and he'd said several. "Tell Pruitt and Youssef to give me 2 days," she said. "I need to—" She stopped. "I need to be able to look at them and not feel like I'm still in that building." Cole nodded. "I'll call them." "Thank you." She walked to her car. She got in. She sat in the driver's seat for a full 3 minutes without starting the engine, watching the oil-stained concrete of the garage floor, thinking about fire and smoke, and a dog's weight against her legs in a dark corridor that smelled like burning wire and dust. Then she started this car and drove home. At 11:47 that night, her phone rang. Cole's number. She answered. Lena. His voice was different. The control still there, but stretched thin over something urgent underneath. I'm at the veterinary hospital on Caldwell. Ranger started bleeding internally about an hour ago. The impact from the accident was worse than the imaging caught. A beat. They're not sure they can stop it. He's crashing. She was already standing. I'll be there in 15 minutes. You don't have to... Cole. She was moving toward the door. I'll be there in 12. She made it in 11. The vet on call was young, exhausted, and visibly out of depth. Not incompetent, but stretched past the edge of her resources at midnight with a critical military working dog and a captain who was running on visible adrenaline and held back panic. Lena walked in and something in the room reorganized itself around her. She wasn't a veterinary professional. She said so clearly and immediately, because it mattered. But she asked for the imaging, asked for the current vitals, asked what interventions had been tried and what the blockage was, and where the bleed was originating. The vet answered, not because she'd been instructed to, but because someone asking the right questions in the right tone had a gravity that was hard to resist. The bleed was internal, retroperitoneal, from the original impact trauma. The first imaging had shown it as minor. It had not stayed minor. Lena looked at the scans, looked at the vet, looked at Cole. You need a vascular approach, she said. Can you do that here? I've done it twice, the vet said. Honest, a little shaky with it. Do you need a second set of hands? A pause. I need someone to manage the pressure readings while I... Yes, I do. Tell me exactly what you need and when you need it, Lena said. She pulled on the gloves the vet handed her. Walk me through it step by step. I'll follow your lead. Cole stood outside the door because there wasn't room for him and because she'd told him to, and she could feel him out there through the glass. The specific tension of a person waiting on an outcome they couldn't control. The procedure took 47 minutes. It was not smooth. Ranger's pressure dropped twice, came back, dropped again, and the vet swore under her breath in a way that said she was working at the edge of her training. Lena managed the monitoring, called the numbers, handed things, anticipated the next step a beat before it was requested because she'd spent years learning to read what someone reaching for the next instrument needed before they said it. At 12:53 in the morning, Ranger's vitals stabilized. The vet sat down on a stool and put her head in her hands for a moment. Not crying, just resetting, the biological necessity of releasing pressure after sustained focus. Lena stripped off the gloves and went to the door. Cole was right there, other side of the glass. She pushed through. He's stable, she said. Cole let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting a long time. She leaned against the wall beside him. Her legs ached. Her left arm ached, the way it always did when she'd been using it hard. The scar tissue didn't flex the same as regular skin. Never had. Probably never would. Thank you, Cole said. Thank the vet, she said. She did the work. Lena. Cole. I'm tired. She said it without heat, just fact. I'll talk to Pruitt and Youssef. I'll talk to Dr. Voss. I'll do whatever the next thing is. She looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion in his face, the silver scar, the held-together quality of a man who'd been holding things together for a long time. But tonight I need to go home and sleep. He nodded. She pushed off the wall, picked up her bag. Lena. His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was looking at her with that same careful, cataloging look, but whatever inventory he'd been taking for the past 3 days had resolved into something more direct. I need you to know something. Whatever happened with your discharge, whatever made you disappear, it doesn't change what you did in that building. It doesn't change what those men owe you. She held his gaze. It might change what they can offer, she said. No, he said. It won't. She didn't answer. She walked out into the night air, crossed the parking lot, got into her car. In the rearview mirror through the vet clinic's glass door, she could see Cole standing exactly where she'd left him, not watching her go, just standing there. And in the window beside him, barely visible in the low clinical light, Ranger's crate, and through the crate door, the faint movement of the dog's head turning slowly, the way it had in the trauma bay, searching the room for something it had spent years without. Her phone buzzed as she pulled onto the street. A text from a number she didn't recognize, area code she didn't immediately place. This is Dale Pruitt. Cole gave me your number. I don't want to push. I just need you to know I've been looking for you for 8 years. I thought you died in that building. I drove 900 miles tonight because I needed to see your face." She sat at a red light, reading it. The light turned green. She didn't move. Behind her, someone tapped their horn once, gently, and she put her foot on the gas and drove. But her hands were not entirely steady on the wheel, and for the first time in a long time, she did not try to make them be. She didn't sleep well, which wasn't surprising. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about Dale Pruitt driving 900 miles through the night. And the particular quality of that, not romantic, not heroic, just the deeply human thing of a person who needed to see something with their own eyes and couldn't wait another day to do it. She understood that impulse. She'd acted on versions of it herself, in circumstances that hadn't allowed for anything as orderly as a car in a highway. She drafted a response to his text 3 times and deleted all 3. What she settled on, at 1:30 in the morning, was, "I'll be at the vet clinic on Caldwell at 8. You can find me there." Brief and specific, which was the best she could do. She slept 4 hours. It felt like 2. Pruitt arrived at 7:58. She was standing outside the clinic when a dark blue pickup pulled into the lot, mud on the lower panels, 2 fast food bags visible through the windshield, the evidence of a man who had in fact driven through the night and not stopped for much. He was bigger than she'd expected, or maybe she'd let her memory compress him, broad through the shoulders, thick-necked, with the kind of face that had once been younger and hadn't entirely decided how to be older. A beard, work-worn hands when he got out of the truck. He stopped 10 feet from her and just stood there for a moment. "You look different," he said finally. "It's been 8 years." "Yeah," he swallowed. "Yeah, it has." They went inside because it was something to do, somewhere to move the conversation. Ranger was in a recovery crate, awake, ears tracking the room. When Pruitt crouched down and put his fingers through the door of the crate, the dog made a low sound and pressed his nose against them. Different from the way he'd responded to Lena, but recognition nonetheless, the specific recall of a dog who did not forget the people who mattered. "He remembered you," Pruitt said, not looking up. He meant Lena. "He needed something familiar," she said. 8 years. He sat back on his heels. "I've had 3 dogs since Ranger, good dogs, but I still..." He stopped. "When Cole sent me the video, I thought I was wrong. I thought I was seeing what I wanted to see." He finally looked at her. "But it was you." "It was me," she said. He stood up. His jaw worked for a moment, and she understood that he was managing something large and didn't entirely have the architecture for it. She didn't try to fill the space. "I need to say this," he said, "because I've been saying it in my head for 8 years to a person I thought was dead." He squared his shoulders, the instinctive formality of someone with military posture. "You went back 3 times. You went back into a building that we had called. You brought out 3 people and a dog, and you didn't..." His voice caught. He pushed through it. "You didn't know if any of us would make it. We didn't know, and you went back anyway." "You would have done the same," she said. "I would have wanted to," he said. "I don't know if I would have." That landed differently than she expected. She'd spent years with the version of that story where she was just doing the job, the thing anyone with the training would do, the practical response to a specific situation. Hearing it from the outside, from someone who had been inside it, made it harder to hold on to that frame. "I'm glad you made it," she said. It came out rougher than she meant it to. "I didn't know. I couldn't find out without opening things I wasn't ready to open, and then it became easier to just not know." Pruitt nodded slowly. "I get that," he said. "More than you'd think." Amir Youssef arrived 40 minutes later. He was smaller than Pruitt, leaner, with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that came from years of having to be quiet in bad situations. He walked in, saw Lena, and stopped moving. Just stopped, like a watch winding down. Then he said, in a voice so controlled it was almost mechanical, "Hi, Doc." She hadn't been called that in 6 years. "Hi, Youssef," she said. He crossed the room and hugged her. No preamble, no negotiation. He just did it, and it was the kind of hug that wasn't about affection so much as confirmation, the physical verification of a fact that couldn't quite be processed any other way. She let it happen. She even hugged back, which surprised her. Cole showed up 20 minutes after that, and for a little while the four of them were in a room together with Ranger between them, and nobody said very much, and it was the most honest 40 minutes Lena had spent in a long time. The Departmental Review Committee meeting was in 6 days. She knew this because Petra texted her a forwarded calendar notice that afternoon, which meant the date was now circulating through the nursing staff in the informal communication network that every hospital had and nobody officially acknowledged. The notice listed the meeting as Administrative Review, Nursing Division, which was a clean title for a process that was considerably less clean. She was building her response. Methodically, the way she built everything. Documentation in chronological order, clinical reasoning attached to each decision point, the specific numbers that showed what she'd caught and when. She had the Doyle timestamps. She had the Tamblyn notes. She had 6 years of performance reviews, all rated effective or above, none of which Hale's report had referenced. What she didn't have was a direct answer to the judgment charge because the judgment charge wasn't really clinical. It was behavioral. She was being flagged for the pattern of acting without explicit authorization. And the challenge was that her authorization documentation was solid. She'd flagged, she'd escalated, she'd followed process. But the spirit of the complaint was about something underneath process. It was about a woman who trusted her own assessment in a room where the credentialed authority had already made a different call. She couldn't defend that the same way she could defend a timestamp. Youssef offered to write a character statement. She said she'd think about it. Pruitt offered to show up in person. She said absolutely not. Not because she didn't appreciate it, but because it would prove Hale's framing before she'd had a chance to dismantle it. Cole said nothing specific, but drove her to pick up her car from the garage near the clinic, which she'd left there the previous night in the chaos, and then sat with her in the parking lot for an hour, talking about nothing relevant while she decompressed, which was either a coincidence or a deliberate act of tactical kindness. She decided it was the latter, and was annoyed at how much it helped. The trouble started on day 4. She was in the middle of a med-surg shift, straightforward morning, an orthopedic post-op, a diabetic maintenance case, nothing that should have mattered, when Dr. Hale appeared on the med-surg floor, which was outside his usual range. He wasn't there for a patient. He was talking to 2 of the staff nurses at the station, and the conversation stopped when Lena walked by in a way that conversations stopped when they were about the person who'd just entered. She couldn't quite make out, and one of the nurses laughed in the slightly uncomfortable way of someone who didn't entirely find the thing funny, but didn't want to be the one who didn't. She charted her morning patients. She made her rounds. She did not look back toward the nursing station. But something had shifted in the floor's atmosphere, and she felt it the way you felt weather before it arrived. In the behavior of the people around her, the slightly careful quality of conversations that stopped a beat too soon when she passed. By mid-afternoon, she understood. Hale had been talking. Not formally, not on the record. The other kind of talking, the kind that moved through a hospital like dye through water, and was impossible to source once it had spread. The specific content reached her through Petra, who repeated it with visible reluctance. That Lena's military background was exaggerated, that the video had been misinterpreted, that Ranger's response was a trained behavior and not recognition, and that the attention Lena was receiving was, in Hale's framing, a distraction she had cultivated rather than a situation that had found her. He said cultivated, Petra confirmed. Those were his words. Lena sat with that for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay? That's Lena. He's telling people you're manufacturing this. I heard you. What are you going to do? She thought about what she had. The timestamps, the clinical records, 6 years of documented work. And now 3 men who'd driven or flown across the country because of something that had nothing to do with the hospital, with Hale, with any of the institutional machinery currently grinding in her direction. I'm going to do my job, she said, until I can't. She had 2 days until the committee meeting. The package arrived at the nursing station the next morning. Not a digital file, not an email attachment, a physical package, brown envelope, addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside were photocopied documents, military letterhead, dates from 8 years ago. She took it to the break room, closed the door, and read. They were mission records. Partial. Some sections redacted with thick black lines, a few pages clearly copied from originals that had been through some kind of damage. Edges uneven, text occasionally interrupted by marks that suggested water or heat. But the legible portions were specific. dates, location designators, casualty counts, the clinical notation of a combat medic's interventions during an extraction. The medic's name on the records was listed as Whitmore, EL. Her service initials, the ones she'd used in theater. Nobody at Redwood Valley had ever seen those initials. Nobody here knew that name. At the bottom of the last page, handwritten in the margin in different ink. This is what actually happened. The committee should see this. AY Amir Youssef. She'd told him not to make moves without asking her. He'd done it anyway. She wasn't entirely angry, but her hands were cold when she folded the documents back into the envelope. She called him from the stairwell. I told you to wait, she said, no preamble. I know. He didn't sound apologetic exactly, more like someone who'd made a decision and was prepared to stand behind it. But Pruitt told me what Hale's been saying, the exaggeration thing. His voice tightened. That's not something I can sit on, Lena. You didn't exaggerate. You did the thing. I was there. If I walk into that committee meeting with documents you sourced for me, he flips the story. I'm not a nurse with a documented track record. I'm someone with outside military connections running a campaign. Or, Youssef said, you're a nurse whose military record speaks for itself, which is a completely different thing. A pause. Those records are real. They've been in a file for 8 years. I didn't fabricate them. I just made copies. She pressed her back against the stairwell wall and thought. How did you get them? She asked. Official request. Veterans access to service records. My name's in them too. It's my right to request a copy of records I appear in. His tone was deliberate. I sent them to you as a courtesy, not as a legal strategy. What you do with them is your call. It was a careful move, legally sound, personally motivated, and it landed in her lap at a moment when she had 2 days in a process that was slowly being weighted against her. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She hung up and stood in the stairwell for a moment, holding the envelope. Then she went back to her patients, because she was still on shift, and the documents would be exactly where she'd left them when the shift was over. The committee meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and Lena arrived at 8:30 with her documentation in a folder and the Youssef envelope in her bag, and the slightly exhausted clarity of someone who had made all the decisions they were going to make and was done renegotiating with herself. The committee room was one she'd never been in. Administrative wing, second floor, the part of the hospital that existed to manage the hospital rather than the patients in it. 6 people around a table, 2 from hospital administration, 1 from HR, 1 independent nursing representative from the state board, 1 physician liaison, and Dr. Victor Hale. Hale sat at the far end. He had his folder, his practice-neutral expression, the specific readiness of a man who had done this before and expected a particular outcome. Carmen Reyes sat to one side as nursing manager, not as a committee member. She was there to represent the division, not to advocate, and they both knew it. She gave Lena a look when she walked in that said, I've done what I can. The rest is yours. The committee chair, a woman named Aldrich from administration, opened the meeting. She understood immediately what the problem was. Aldrich was using the framing of Hale's incident reports as the baseline document, which meant the entire opening of the meeting was built on his narrative architecture. The Doyle case was presented as an escalation failure. The K-9 situation was presented as an unauthorized use of resources. Her removal from trauma rotation was framed as a temporary protective measure rather than what it actually was. She let it run. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, specific words, specific framings, and she waited. When Aldrich finished the summary and asked Lena if she had anything to add before the committee reviewed the documentation, Lena said, Yes, but I'd like to go through the timeline first if the committee will allow it. Aldrich looked at Hale. Hale gave a small nod, the kind of nod that said, Let her try. Lena opened her folder. She started with the Doyle case. Not her version of it, the timestamps. She read the system entries out loud, in sequence. The time of admission, the time of her initial clinical flag, the specific notation in her first assessment that read, Recommend surgical consult, pressure trending inconsistent with blunt trauma presentation. The time that note had been logged, 19 minutes after Doyle arrived. The surgical consult was not requested until 41 minutes after my notation, she said. That's in the system. I didn't write that number. The system generated it. The HR rep was writing. The nursing board representative had her reading glasses on and was looking at her own copy of the documentation. The incident report characterizes my actions as a delay in escalation, Lena continued. The system record shows a flag logged 19 minutes into admission and a surgical response 41 minutes after that flag. The gap between my documentation and the surgical response is the gap, not a gap I created. Hale leaned forward. Your flag was notated but not verbally communicated to the attending. The protocol for escalation in this department is documentation followed by direct communication if no response within 30 minutes, Lena said. I documented at 19 minutes. At 32 minutes, I called the attending. The call log is in the system. She slid a printed page across the table. That's the timestamp. Hale's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A slight recalibration. The adjustment of a man who had written the story one way and was now watching the sequence not line up the way he'd arranged it. The physician liaison, a man named Birch, who had the look of someone who read documentation carefully and formed opinions slowly, picked up the page and read it. The 32-minute call, he said. Is there a record of the attending's response? There's no documentation of a response, Lena said, because there wasn't one until the code at 47 minutes. She kept her voice even. I'm not characterizing that. I'm reading the timestamps. Aldrich wrote something. The room was quiet in the way rooms got quiet when the expected shape of a meeting was shifting. Hale cleared his throat. The Trembling case wasn't in your incident report, Lena said. A beat. The Trembling case, she said, was a 68-year-old woman who presented with back pain and was triaged as a musculoskeletal complaint. I identified asymmetric blood pressure, ordered imaging on my own initiative, and flagged an aortic dissection that had been presenting atypically for 6 hours. She slid another page across. The attending who received that case documented that the nursing catch was the reason she reached surgery in time. That notation is in her chart. She looked around the table. It's not in Dr. Hale's incident report. The silence had a different quality now. Hale set down his pen. The Trembling case isn't relevant to the escalation concerns I raised. It's relevant to the characterization of my clinical judgment, Lena said, which is the stated basis of the performance flag. She met his eyes, and she kept her voice exactly where it had been, measured, factual, not unkind, not aggressive, just precise. If the committee is reviewing my pattern of clinical decision-making, then the full pattern is relevant, not a selected portion of it. Birch was still reading the page she'd given him. He turned it over, checked the back, set it down. Miss Whitmore, he said, the K9 situation, the use of the trauma bay. The charge nurse sanctioned it, she said, Marcus Delgado. He's available to speak to the committee if needed. The supply cost was documented. I inventoried what was used and logged it the same day. The imaging was one set of films billed through the standard military liaison protocol that the hospital has used for federal cases before. She paused. The animal's condition at the time of treatment was consistent with imminent deterioration. The nearest veterinary trauma facility was 42 minutes away. I have the address and standard transport time from 3 map applications if that's useful. Someone at the table made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in its neighborhood. Hale said, the issue was authorization, not cost. Marcus Delgado authorized the bay, Lena said. He is the charge nurse. That is within his authority per department protocol. You acted before authorization. I asked questions, she said. I said, the bay is open. I'll need the portable ultrasound. Marcus said yes. I proceeded. She looked at Hale directly. If the committee would like to review the definition of authorization, I'm happy to do that. But I'd want to use the department's written protocol, not a working definition established after the fact. The room was very quiet. Aldrich looked at Hale. Hale was looking at his folder, and for the first time in the meeting, he was not entirely in control of his expression. The recess was called at 10:15. Lena went to the hallway. She stood near the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the hospital parking lot, the flat gray morning light, a maintenance worker pushing a cart across the pavement below. She was running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 days of sustained low-level dread, and she was tired in a way that had started in her legs and worked upward. Reyes appeared at her elbow. That was thorough, Reyes said. It's all documented. I know, that's... Yes. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Birch asked to see the full personnel file during the recess. Not just the last 2 weeks, all 6 years. Lena absorbed that. What does that mean? It means someone at that table is doing math that goes beyond what Hale filed. Reyes glanced toward the committee room. I don't know how this resolves, Lena, but it's not running the way he expected it to run. That was something. It didn't feel like enough yet, but it was something. There's something else, Reyes said. Her voice shifted, careful, the way she got careful when she was about to say something she wasn't sure how to say. Someone sent a letter to the hospital board this morning, official Army Medical Command letterhead. Lena turned to look at her. Dr. Adrienne Voss, Reyes said. I've never heard of her. Administration is trying to figure out how seriously to take it. What did it say? Reyes pulled out her phone, read from a forwarded email. Letter received this morning from Army Medical Command Liaison Office, signed by Dr. Adrienne Voss, requesting that the hospital board be aware that a current staff member is party to an active military record remediation process involving classified operational documentation, and that any adverse employment action taken during the remediation window may be subject to federal review under the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. She lowered the phone. USERRA. That's the law that protects veterans from employment discrimination related to their service. Lena said nothing. Did you ask her to send that? Reyes asked. No. Reyes looked at her steadily. But you're not surprised. Lena stopped. I told Cole I wanted to handle this myself, with what I built here. You did handle it yourself, Reyes said. What Dr. Voss sent is supplementary. She didn't intervene in the committee meeting. She notified the board. A beat. There's a difference. Lena thought about Cole's voice in the parking garage. Those aren't separate things. She thought about Yusef's documents in her bag, which she hadn't used. She thought about the specific pride that had made her want to win this without the weight of her past behind her, and whether that pride was actually serving her or whether it was just the civilian version of something she'd been carrying since she walked out of a burning building and into a life that didn't know she existed. How is administration reading it? She asked. Very carefully, Reyes said, which is the most useful thing they could be doing right now. So, the committee reconvened at 10:40. Birch had the 6-year file. He'd clearly read it in the recess, or read enough of it, because when Aldrich opened the session, it was Birch who spoke first. I'd like to enter something into the record, he said. The nursing performance reviews for the past 6 years show a consistent rating of effective or above, with 2 exceptional ratings in years 3 and 5. No prior incident flags. No patient complaints. He set the file down. The 2 incidents under review represent the first formal documentation of concern in 6 years of employment. First-time concerns still warrant review, Hale said. Agreed, Birch said, but the framing of a pattern requires more than 2 data points, particularly when the surrounding context shows a 6-year baseline in the opposite direction. He looked at Hale, not unkindly but without deference. I'm also noting that one of the 2 cases cited, the trembling case, resulted in a positive outcome directly attributable to the nurse in question and was not included in the incident report. The trembling case, Dr. Hale. Birch's tone did not change, but it settled, the way things settled when a person with authority decided to use it. I've read the trembling chart. The attending's notation is explicit. The word catch is in there. A pause. The omission of that case from an incident report filed the same day is something I'd like to understand better. The room was very still. Hale said, the trembling case was managed by the attending. The nursing role, the attending documented the nursing catch as causative, Birch said. That's not a support role. That's a clinical intervention. He looked at Aldrich. I think we need to table the performance flag pending a full case review that includes all relevant incidents from the relevant period. Both what was filed and what wasn't. Aldrich looked around the table. The HR rep was watching Hale. The nursing board representative had her hands flat on the table in a way that suggested she'd formed an opinion and was waiting for the appropriate moment. Dr. Hale, Aldrich said, do you want to respond? Hale looked at his folder. He looked at the table. He said, I stand by my clinical assessment of the Doyle escalation. The timestamp record suggests the escalation was within protocol, the nursing board representative said. She hadn't spoken until now. Her voice was measured. I'd want independent verification, but what's been presented today is not consistent with the incident report's characterization. Hale's jaw tightened. The protocol allows for professional judgment in determining when documentation constitutes sufficient escalation. It does, the rep said. And the professional exercising that judgment here documented it 19 minutes and called it 32. That's a 23-minute gap. Protocol allows 30. She looked at him. So either the protocol needs revising, or this particular application of it isn't the issue. The quiet in the room had changed quality again. Something harder in it now, less uncertain. Aldrich said, I'm going to recommend we adjourn and schedule a second review session with expanded documentation. The performance flag will be held in inactive status during that period. She looked at Lena. You'll continue your current rotation pending the second review. The trauma restriction is also suspended. Hale said, I object to but... Noted, Aldrich said, not unkindly, but final. Lena walked out of the committee room at 11:15. The hallway was empty. She stood in it for a moment, holding her folder, and felt the specific deflation of sustained tension without a clean resolution. Not a win, not a loss, a deferral, which was its own kind of exhausting. Reyes fell in beside her. Active flag suspended, Reyes said. Trauma restriction lifted. That's movement. It's not over, Lena said. No, but you're still standing. Reyes glanced at her. Go home. You've been here since 8. I have a shift. I'll cover your shift. Go home. She went home. She sat at her kitchen table and called Cole, because he deserved to know what had happened, and because she needed to tell someone who would understand the specific texture of it. The victory that wasn't quite. The ground held without the ground being won. He picked up on the second ring. They tabled it, she said. Suspended the flag. Trauma restriction lifted. A pause. That's good. It's not over. Second review. But the committee read 6 years of my file, and Birch, the physician liaison, he pointed out the Tamblin omission. Hale had to answer for it in the room. Did he? Not really, she said. He stood by his assessment, but standing by an assessment in a room where 3 other people are looking at you differently than you expected is its own kind of accountability. It is, Cole said. She heard something in his voice. What? Voss sent the letter, he said. I didn't ask her to. She made that call independently. I want you to know that. Reyes told me. I know you wanted to do this on your own terms. It's done, she said. Not forgiving, not exactly, just moving past the part where the how of it needed relitigating. It helped. I don't know how much, but it helped. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, Pruitt's still in town. Youssef too. They want to know if you'll have dinner tonight, something low-key. Nothing formal. She thought about sitting at a table with Dale Pruitt and Amir Youssef and eating food and being a person who had a past that those 2 people shared and who was somehow supposed to exist normally in the present while all of that was in the room. Yeah, she said. Okay. 7 o'clock? There's a place on Meridian that Youssef found. He says it's not bad. Tell him my bar for not bad is fairly low right now. She heard Cole almost smile through the phone. I'll tell him. Dinner was imperfect and good. Youssef had found a Thai place that was exactly what it looked like from outside. Small, slightly too loud, the kind of restaurant where the food was serious and the decor was not. They took a corner table and Ranger was technically in Cole's truck in the parking lot, but Cole kept checking his phone for the monitoring app that the vet had set up, and Pruitt ordered 3 dishes because he was still running on a fast food deficit from the drive. And Lena ate Pad See Ew and felt something in her shoulders slowly, reluctantly, begin to release. They talked around the important things for the first hour. Jobs, cities, the specific absurdity of the video going viral. Pruitt had thoughts about the comments section that were vivid and accurate. Youssef had apparently read everyone. At some point, midway through the second round of drinks, nobody quite tracking when it shifted, Pruitt put his hands around his glass and said, I need to ask you something. Lena looked at him. What happened after? He said. After the extraction. You disappeared. Cole said the records were a mess, the discharge was complicated. But what actually happened? The table got quieter. Youssef was looking at his plate. Cole was looking at Lena. She'd rehearsed this, in a general way, for 8 years. In the specific way, the words, the sequence, The version she'd actually say out loud to people who'd been there. She hadn't rehearsed it at all. "I was injured in the second entry," she said. "Not badly enough to evacuate immediately, but enough that by the time the debrief happened, I was on pain management that I made a statement that was contradicted by my condition. They thought I was confused. The record was flagged as unreliable." She kept her voice even. "The processing error compounded it. My name went in wrong, tied to a different casualty record. By the time it surfaced, I was already out." "Out as in discharged?" Pruitt asked. "Out as in separated due to the record's discrepancy and my injury claim being contested." She set down her fork. "It's a longer story. There was an appeal process, and it ran for 2 years, and I ran out of—" She stopped. "I ran out of the energy to keep running it. I took the separation, took the civilian life, and started over." The table was quiet. "They contested your injury claim," Youssef said. Flat. Not a question. "The records had me in the wrong location at the wrong time. My injuries couldn't be matched to a documented incident because the documentation had me somewhere else." She picked up her fork again. "It's fixable. Voss says it's fixable. The remediation process Cole mentioned." "Lena." Pruitt's voice had changed. "You saved our lives and they contested your injury claim. It was a paperwork problem." "It was not a paperwork problem." She met his eyes. The thing in his face was anger, not at her, for her, which was a specific kind of anger that she had no practiced response to. She'd spent years being the person who was matter-of-fact about what had happened, who had metabolized the injustice of it into the background texture of her life, who had moved forward because moving forward was the only direction available. Having someone be angry about it on her behalf felt like something she didn't have the right container for. "I know," she said finally. "I know it wasn't just paperwork." Pruitt nodded. He looked at the table, looked back up. "Okay, what do we do about it?" "Voss has the remediation file. The records Youssef requested are part of it. It's a process." She paused. "It takes time." "How much time?" She said 4 to 6 months for a full correction. Could be longer. Pruitt looked at Cole. Something passed between them. Quick, decided. "We're going to be here," Cole said, to Lena. "Not in your way. But we're not going anywhere." She looked at him. She'd spent 3 days watching Cole Mercer be careful with her, give her exits, hold space without filling it, and she'd categorized it as military professionalism, and she was no longer entirely sure that was the full category. "You have a unit," she said. "You have a command. I have leave," he said. "And Pruitt has a garage that his second-in-command has been running since he left Montana, and Youssef has— I have 7 weeks of PTO that my CO has been threatening to mandate," Youssef said. "So," she looked around the table at the 3 of them. 3 people who had driven and flown and filed official requests and shown up, and were now sitting here proposing to continue showing up. And the thing she felt was not gratitude exactly, or not only that, but something more complicated. The specific vertigo of a person who has organized their life around not needing things and is suddenly confronted with the possibility of having them anyway. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it," Pruitt said. "We're just telling you." She ate her pad see-ew. Pruitt ordered dessert. Youssef found something to disagree with Cole about, and they argued it for 20 minutes with the ease of men who'd argued in worse conditions. The restaurant got louder and then quieter as the evening moved through itself. She was almost all the way to feeling something she might have called okay when Cole's phone went off. He looked at it, and his expression changed. Not alarm, but the specific sharpening of a man who had learned to read notifications the way other people read headlines. "What?" she asked. He turned the phone toward her. A news alert. Local outlet, Redwood Valley Courier, 15 minutes old. Exclusive. Internal documents raise questions about Redwood Valley Medical Center's handling of nursing misconduct cases. Sources cite pattern of selective reporting. She read it twice. The article was short but specific. It referenced 2 cases. The details were slightly obscured but unmistakable, and cited internal sources familiar with the review process. It quoted a nursing board representative, unnamed, as saying the committee had identified documentation inconsistencies. Someone had talked to the press, during or immediately after the committee meeting. Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again. Then a third time in quick succession, different numbers, and she knew before she checked that the hospital administration was calling and that the evening had just ended. She looked up from her phone at Cole, at Pruitt, at Youssef, at the half-eaten food and the low restaurant light and the version of the night that had been happening until about 90 seconds ago. "I have to go," she said. Cole was already signaling for the check. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Petra. Hale just left the building. Security escorted him to his car. Admin is in emergency session. "Lena, what is happening?" She stared at the text. "Read it again." Hale had been escorted out. Not suspended formally, not yet, but removed from the building while administration convened, which was the institutional equivalent of a held breath before something broke. She stood up, put on her jacket. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. Outside, the night air was cool, and the parking lot was quiet, and Cole's truck was where he'd left it. And through the window, she could see the faint shape of Ranger in his crate, nose at the grate, ears forward, tracking her across the lot. She stopped at the truck and pressed her hand flat against the window. Ranger's tail moved, once, then again. She had 3 missed calls from hospital administration, one from Reyes and one from a number she recognized after a moment as belonging to Dr. Adrienne Voss. She called Voss back first because whatever was happening had started with something Voss knew about, and she needed to understand it before she walked back into the building. Voss picked up on the first ring. Her voice was precise and very controlled, the voice of someone managing a situation they had not anticipated becoming this large, this fast. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "there's been a development." "I saw the article," Lena said. "The article is the smaller development." A brief pause. "During the records remediation process, we requested the original mission documentation from the Army archives. Standard procedure. What came back?" Another pause. Longer. "What came back includes a supplemental report that was filed 14 days after the original after-action report. The supplemental directly contradicts several entries in the original." Lena went still. "Contradicts them how?" she asked. "The original report credits a tactical response team with the extractions," Voss said. "The supplemental, which was filed later by a different officer and was subsequently buried in the archive under a miscategorization, identifies a combat medic acting independently, by name, with timestamps." Voss's voice was careful. "It also includes a notation that the original report was reviewed by a senior officer and that the officer requested the supplemental be, and I'm quoting here, deprioritized for archival processing." The parking lot was very quiet. "Someone tried to bury it," Lena said. "Someone did bury it," Voss said. "For 8 years. Why?" The pause this time was different, measured, the kind of pause that preceded something with weight. "The senior officer who requested the deprioritization," Voss said, "retired from the Army in 2019 and is currently on the board of directors of Redwood Valley Medical Center." Lena stood in the parking lot with the phone against her ear and the night air against her face, and the thing she felt was not shock. She had been surprised too many times in too many directions over the past week to have surprise left, but something colder and more precise. The sensation of a picture that had been out of focus for 8 years suddenly resolving into a clarity that was not, in any way, a comfort. She heard Cole come up behind her. She heard him stop when he registered her stillness. "Ms. Whitmore," Voss said, "are you still there?" "I'm here," she said. "We need you to come in tomorrow. Army Medical Command, in conjunction with the hospital board, is convening a formal review, not of your record, of the original report." Behind her, Cole said nothing. He was close enough that she could hear him breathing. "Who's the board member?" Lena asked. Voss said the name. It was a name Lena had seen on plaques in the hospital lobby. A name on the wall of the building where she had worked for 6 years, where she had spent 6 years being quietly, methodically excellent, while the institution that hosted her carried, on its board, the man who had spent 8 years making sure her name stayed out of the record of the thing that should have defined her career. She lowered the phone. Cole said quietly, "Lena." She turned around. He was right there, close, and behind him Pruitt and Youssef were standing by the truck, reading her face with the practiced attention of men who had learned to read situations before they were told what was in them. "How deep does this go?" Cole asked. She looked at him. "Deep enough," she said, "that it didn't happen by accident." Cole drove her home that night and didn't come inside, which was the right call. She needed the silence. She sat at her kitchen table until past midnight, not reviewing documents, not planning responses, just sitting with the shape of what she now knew. 8 years of believing the erasure had been bureaucratic, a cascade of processing errors, a record system doing what record systems did when they were underfunded and overloaded. The version where no one was culpable, where it was just the grinding indifference of institutional machinery, had been easier to carry than this. A name on a wall, a retired officer on a board of directors, a supplemental report buried under a miscategorization that didn't happen by accident. She thought about the 6 years she'd spent in this building, walking past that wall, past that name on the donor plaque near the east entrance. She'd never connected it to anything because she'd had no reason to. She hadn't known to look. She went to bed at 1 in the morning. She did not sleep well, which was no longer surprising. The Army Medical Command's Regional Liaison Office occupied the 3rd floor of a federal building 12 minutes from the hospital, and Lena arrived at 8:55 in a clean set of civilian clothes. Not scrubs, not her committee meeting folder, just herself, and was shown to a conference room where Dr. Voss was already seated with 2 men Lena didn't recognize and Cole, who had apparently been there for an hour. He stood when she came in. She waved him down. The 2 unfamiliar men were introduced as investigators from the Army Inspector General's office. They were courteous, efficient, and had the quality of people for whom the emotional temperature of a room was data rather than atmosphere. One of them, a man named Hargrove, did most of the talking. "We want to be clear about the scope of this meeting," Hargrove said. "We're not here to ask you to testify against anyone. We're here to review the supplemental report and to hear your account of the events of October 14th, 2017, for the purpose of correcting the official record. Everything else, the board member, the hospital situation, that investigation is running parallel and separately." "Who's running it?" Lena asked. "The Department of Defense IG and the State Medical Board, jointly. The hospital board has been notified. The individual in question has retained counsel." She absorbed that. "How long has this individual been on the board?" "He was appointed 4 years after his retirement," Hargrove said. "His connection to this hospital predates your employment there by 2 years. She thought about that. The timeline of it, the sequence in which she had, without knowing it, walked into a building where the architecture of her erasure was already part of the institutional furniture. There was something about that specific coincidence that wanted to become a story, she told herself, a pattern with meaning. She resisted it. Coincidences happened. People ended up in the same rooms as their histories all the time without the universe intending anything by it. "What do you need from me?" she said. What they needed was 3 hours of her account in sequence, with specific attention to the events of those 3 building entries. What she saw, what she did, what decisions she made and why, the clinical reasoning behind each intervention, the timeline of her injuries and when they occurred. Hargrove asked careful questions. His colleague took notes. Voss occasionally clarified a procedural point. Lena told it without drama, which was the only way she knew how. She had spent 8 years not telling it, and now that she found that it came out in the same voice she used for clinical documentation. Specific, sequenced, attached to reasons. The burning corridor. The weight of Dale Pruitt across her shoulders on the second entry. The sound a dog made when it was injured and didn't understand why. The 3rd time going in when the structural integrity was already compromised, and she knew it and went anyway, because there was still a man in there and she wasn't going to stand outside and know that. At one point, Hargrove stopped writing and just looked at her. "You knew the building was unstable," he said. "Yes," she said, "and you entered anyway." "There was a soldier in there," she said. "That's not complicated." Hargrove looked at his notes. Then he looked back up. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." The hospital board convened an emergency session at 2 in the afternoon. Lena wasn't in it. She was back at Redwood Valley, on the floor, doing her job, because she had patients, and she was still a nurse, and the institutional earthquake happening 2 floors above her and 12 minutes across town did not stop people from needing care. She found out what happened the same way most of the nursing staff did. Through Petra, who was receiving a steady stream of updates from someone she refused to name, but who was clearly inside the administrative wing. The board member. His name was Raymond Caulfield, and now that she knew it, she could see his face clearly, the man from the lobby plaque, silver-haired, The practiced warmth of someone who had spent decades being photographed at fundraisers, had resigned his board seat before the session began. His attorney had issued a statement characterizing his involvement in the record's deprioritization as a judgment call made in a time of operational uncertainty, not an intentional suppression. The statement did not land well. The IG office had the original communication, the specific language of deprioritized for archival processing, and the timestamp showing it had been filed 11 days after a commendation recommendation for the same medic had been submitted by a field officer, a recommendation that had also, somehow, never reached its destination. They had two documents, Petra told her, voice low, in the medication room, the commendation and the suppression order. The commendation was filed first. Caulfield's directive came after. Lena processed this. He knew about the commendation. That's what they're saying, that he knew and then he... Yeah. She stood with that for a moment. The commendation. Someone in the field, 8 years ago, had written up what she did and submitted the paperwork, and then it had disappeared into a directive from a man who had, for reasons she didn't yet fully understand, decided that her name should not appear in the record. She would probably learn the full reasons eventually. The IG investigation would surface them, or it wouldn't, and either way she would have to decide what to do with the knowing. But standing in the medication room with Petra's phone, showing her a news alert about Caulfield's resignation, she found that the reasons mattered less than she'd expected. The fact of it was large enough on its own. Hale? She asked. Still out of the building. Administration is reviewing his incident reports against the full case records. Petra paused. Apparently Birch requested an independent clinical review of both the Doyle and Tamblyn cases. External reviewer, not internal. That'll take weeks. Yeah, but it started. Dr. Victor Hale's formal suspension came 4 days later. Not termination, not yet, because the institution moved on its own timeline, and termination required a process that suspension did not. But suspension with pay pending the outcome of the independent clinical review, which was the hospital's way of removing someone from the equation while maintaining the legal fiction that the outcome remained undetermined. Lena learned about it from Reyes, who called her at home on a Thursday evening. I wanted you to hear it from me, Reyes said. Thank you. The independent reviewer flagged both cases the same way you did. The Doyle documentation supports your escalation timeline. The Tamblyn omission. Reyes paused. The reviewer's language was material omission in the context of a disciplinary action, which is a specific kind of language with specific kinds of implications. For the incident reports he filed. For the incident reports he filed, Reyes confirmed, which were the basis of your performance flag. A beat. The flag is being removed from your file, completely, with a formal notation that the review process identified evidentiary concerns with the original documentation. Lena sat on her couch in her apartment, phone against her ear, and felt something that wasn't triumph. Triumph was too clean and too loud for what this actually was. It was more like the specific physical sensation of setting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd stop noticing the weight. Okay, she said. That's all you've got? Reyes said. There was something warm in her voice, not quite amusement, something more complicated than that. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, Lena said. I documented everything. I did the work. And then I had to spend 3 weeks justifying the documentation to a committee because someone with more institutional weight decided to frame it differently. She paused. I'm glad it's resolved. I'm tired. Not of the job, just of the amount of energy it took to defend something that should have been self-evident. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Yeah, she said. I know. Does that get easier? Sometimes, Reyes said. And sometimes you just get better at not bleeding in public while it's happening. It wasn't a comforting answer. It was an honest one, which was more useful. The Army's formal correction of her record was completed 5 weeks later, which was faster than Voss had projected and slower than the part of Lena that had been waiting 8 years would have preferred. She received the official notification on a Tuesday morning. A letter, actual paper, with official letterhead and signatures, correcting the name discrepancy, reinstating the injury documentation with verified field evidence, and formally entering her actions on October 14, 2017, into the record as Independent Combat Medical Intervention resulting in extraction of 3 personnel and 1 military working animal under active hostile conditions. The commendation was reinstated too. She read it twice, standing at her kitchen counter in her scrubs before a morning shift, and then she put it down and made coffee and stared at the window for a while. She wasn't sure what she'd expected to feel when this happened. Something larger, maybe. Something more definitive. What she felt was quieter than that. A door closing on a room she'd been standing outside of for 8 years. The soft sound of a latch settling into place. Not joyful, not triumphant, just done. She took a picture of the letter and sent it to Cole. His response came back in 4 minutes, a single line. It was always true. Now it's also official. She sent the same picture to Pruitt and Youssef. Pruitt responded with a string of words that were mostly not printable. Youssef sent back, "About time. Dinner tonight?" She sent back, "Yes." Hale's termination was finalized 3 weeks after his suspension, following the independent clinical review and a separate investigation into a pattern the review had surfaced. Not just the 2 cases he'd filed against Lena, but a broader record of incident reports filed against nursing staff in the years of his tenure that disproportionately targeted nurses who had formally documented concerns about his clinical decisions. 5 cases over 4 years. In each one, the nurse had documented something. In each one, Hale had filed a counter-report. In 3 of those 5 cases, the nurse was no longer at Redwood Valley. The state medical board opened a formal inquiry. It would take months. The outcome wasn't certain. These things rarely were. But the process was moving, and the process being visible was its own form of accountability. It meant that the pattern now existed in official records where people could look at it, and the specific protection that invisibility had offered was gone. Lena didn't attend any of the administrative proceedings. She wasn't asked to, and she didn't volunteer. She had her documentation, her timestamps, and the independent reviewer's findings. Those things would do what they needed to do without her presence. She had patience. She had a floor to cover. She went to work. Caulfield's situation was more complicated and took longer. The IG investigation surfaced the full context eventually. He had been the senior officer overseeing the after-action review, and the field officer's commendation for Lena had arrived on his desk during a period when the unit's operational record was under scrutiny for a different reason, a decision made earlier in the same deployment that he had authorized, and that had not gone cleanly. An unambiguous act of individual heroism in the same unit during the same operational period invited comparisons he had not wanted made. So he'd buried it. Not violently, not with elaborate machination, just the quiet exercise of authority, a directive to deprioritize, and then time doing what time did. The DoD investigation recommended charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for conduct unbecoming and obstruction of official records. Whether those charges would proceed through a full court-martial was still being determined when Lena stopped tracking the details. Not because she didn't care, but because she had decided that her life could not be organized around the outcome of a process she couldn't control. His resignation from the board was public. The investigation was public. The name on the lobby plaque came down. She noticed it one morning in passing, the slightly lighter rectangle of wall where it had been, the ghost of removed letters. Someone had done it overnight, efficiently, without fanfare. She stood there for a moment, looking at the blank space. Then she walked on, because she was going to be late for her shift. The conversation she'd been avoiding happened on a Saturday afternoon in early spring in the veterinary clinic on Caldwell, while she was visiting the terrier she'd named Griff, the stray from the alley, now fully recovered, now technically hers because she'd paid for his treatment and nobody else had come forward, and at some point keeping him had become less complicated than not keeping him. Cole was there because he'd been coming to the clinic with her on Saturday afternoons for the past month, ostensibly to check on Ranger's recovery progress, actually because this was what they did now, and neither of them had formally acknowledged what that meant. Griff was asleep on Cole's boot. Ranger was in a recovery pen, watching the room with his customary forensic attention. The clinic was quiet, mid-afternoon, the vet tech doing paperwork at the desk. "I'm going back to the unit next month," Cole said. She'd known it was coming. He'd been managing remote administrative work for 6 weeks. That kind of extension had a ceiling. "I know," she said. "Fort Harlan. It's not the other side of the world." "It's not here," she said. "No." He looked at her. It's not here. She scratched Griff behind the ear. He shifted without waking. I'm not good at this, she said. At what specifically? She gestured vaguely between them. Whatever this is. I'm good at work. I'm good at the thing in front of me. I'm not practiced at... She stopped. I spent 6 years being very efficiently alone. I know, he said. That's not a small thing to change. I'm not asking you to change it overnight, he said. I'm telling you I'm going to Fort Harlan, and Fort Harlan is 4 hours by car, and I have leave and you have days off, and I'm proposing that we figure out the rest as we go. He paused. I'm not asking you to be different than you are. I'm just... A beat. I found you. I spent 8 years carrying the weight of that day, the call I made, the people I thought were gone. And then I found you. I'm not interested in being efficient about what happens next. She looked at him. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. She'd established that much. And he was not performing anything, and the thing she felt was the specific vertigo she'd felt before, the ground shifting under a person who'd built their balance around standing still. Okay, she said. Okay? 4 hours is manageable, she said, and you're annoying enough to make days off interesting. Cole looked at her for a moment, then something in his face loosened, the held quality he carried most of the time, the contained readiness. And he laughed. Not politely. Actually, laughed. Griff woke up and looked around in alarm. What? The program proposal took her 2 months to write, partly because she was doing it alongside a full work schedule, and partly because she wrote it wrong the first 3 times. The first version was too clinical, a framework document, structures and protocols, the kind of thing that would survive a committee review and bore everyone who read it. The second version overcorrected, too narrative, too personal. The third version she scrapped entirely and started from a question. What would have helped her 8 years ago, moving from a combat medical context into a civilian hospital environment where nobody understood the translation and she didn't know how to explain it? The answer was a bridge. Not a therapy program, not a mentorship program, not a veterans resource center with a pamphlet rack. A working bridge, something that created actual contact between military medical personnel and civilian trauma teams, that built competency in both directions, that let the knowledge transfer without requiring the veterans to erase themselves to fit the new environment. She called it the Crossover Emergency Training Initiative. It was not a catchy name. She left it because it said exactly what it was. She submitted it to Redwood Valley's administration with a cover letter that was 3 paragraphs long. 2 days later, the chief of medicine, a woman named Dr. Solka, who had largely stayed clear of the Hale situation and was now, Lena suspected, interested in building something that went in a different direction, asked for a meeting. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Solka asked specific questions, the kind that indicated she'd read the full proposal, and Lena answered them. And at the end, Solka said, "What do you need to pilot this? 3 months? 4 trauma staff willing to cross-train, access to the simulation bay on off hours, and 2 military medical personnel who'll commit to a working exchange." Lena paused. "I have the 2 military personnel already." Youssef had agreed immediately. A combat medic from Pruitt's network, a woman named Sergeant Delacroix, who had been trying to transition to civilian nursing for 2 years and kept running into the same translation wall, had agreed after 1 phone call. Solka looked at her. "And the nursing staff? You can recruit 4? Petra Vance," Lena said him. "And 3 others. Yes. You're confident." "I've worked with them for 6 years," Lena said. "They're good. They just haven't had this specific exposure." Solka nodded slowly. "Submit a budget outline by the end of the month." She paused. "I want to be clear. This isn't a rehabilitation project for the department's image after the Hale situation. If that's how it gets perceived, it's a training program," Lena said. "The timing is what it is. The work is what it is." Solka looked at her for a moment with an expression Lena couldn't entirely read. Something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite respect, but was in the neighborhood of both. "Budget outline," she said. "End of the month." What? The ceremony wasn't her idea. It was Pruitt's, which surprised her, because Pruitt was generally the most practically minded person in any room, and ceremony was not usually where practical minds went. But he called her on a February evening and said he'd been talking to Youssef and to Cole and to a few others from the unit, the ones who'd been at the perimeter that day, the ones who'd been trying for 8 years to find a name to attach to what had happened, and they wanted to do something formal. Not a party, he said immediately, anticipating her objection. Nothing like that, just a thing, a real thing, where we say it out loud. She said she'd think about it. She thought about it for 2 weeks. She thought about the version of herself who had walked out of that building and into 8 years of carefully constructed invisibility, and whether accepting something public and formal was a betrayal of the person who'd made that choice, or whether it was just the next thing. The thing after the choice, the thing the choice had ultimately been in service of. She called Pruitt back and said yes. It was not a large event. She'd been specific about that. The hospital's East Conference Room, a Sunday morning in March, 2 weeks before the Crossover Training Initiative's official pilot launch. The people there were the people who had been part of it: Pruitt, Youssef, Cole, Delacroix, 2 others from the unit who'd driven in, men she recognized from a version of herself she'd thought was over: Reyes, Petra, Birch, who had come because he'd asked to and she hadn't said no. Dr. Voss, the vet from Caldwell whose name was Dr. Okafor, because Ranger was there and Ranger had made his own claim on the story. Griff was technically not allowed in the building. He was there anyway, sitting on Lena's left foot under the table, a small warm weight she'd decided was non-negotiable. There was no podium. There was coffee that Petra had organized, and a folding table with the kind of catering tray that indicated someone had tried without overcommitting, and chairs arranged in a rough circle that didn't require anyone to face an audience because there wasn't one. Cole stood first, which was not part of any plan she'd been told about. He didn't make a speech. He talked the way Cole talked when he was being direct, without performance, without the framing of an occasion. He said that 8 years ago he'd made a call, and it had been the wrong call, and a woman he didn't know had made the right one in his place. He said that the men in this room were alive because of that, and that for 8 years the name attached to that fact had been wrong, and that he had spent a significant part of that 8 years carrying the specific weight of not knowing who to thank and not being able to put it down. "I know now," he said. He looked at Lena. "We all know now." Pruitt didn't make a speech either. He stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "You brought me out. That's it. That's what I've got. Thank you." He sat back down with the slightly raw expression of a man who had said the important thing and wasn't going to dress it up. Youssef, characteristically, said more. He talked about the translation wall, the thing she'd built a program around, and how it felt to move from a world where you spoke a specific language of emergency into one where nobody understood the dialect, and how that erosion happened quietly, the way all important losses happened, in the ordinary texture of days where nothing catastrophic occurred but something was still being lost. "You built a bridge," he said, 8 years ago in a building, and now here, both times without being asked. He shrugged, the slight self-conscious movement of someone who had used up their prepared words. "I just wanted to say it was the same thing, both times, same person, same bridge." She hadn't prepared anything to say. She told herself she wouldn't need to, that she'd sit in the chair and receive it and nod, and that would be enough. It had seemed manageable from a distance. Up close, with Cole on her left and Pruitt across the circle, and Youssef with his hands around his coffee cup, with Ranger lying between her chair and Cole's, and Griff still on her foot, and Petra crying quietly in the way Petra cried. Committed, unapologetic, she found that she was not going to be able to get away with not speaking. She stood up. "I'm not good at this," she said, which was what she'd told Cole about other things, and seemed equally true here. She looked around the room, at the faces she'd spent 8 years not looking at. "I went back into that building because there was someone in it," she said. "I want to be clear about that. It wasn't because I was brave or because I had some larger thing in mind. I was a medic, and there were people who needed a medic, and that was the calculation. That's the only calculation I made." She stopped, found the thread again. "What I want to say, what I've been trying to say to myself for a while, is that the 8 years after that mattered too. Not the injury claim, not the records, not any of that. The work. The 6 years in this building, the patients I caught, the things I documented, the shift I did this past Tuesday where nothing extraordinary happened and I still came home knowing I'd done it right." She paused. "I spent a long time treating the 2 versions of myself as separate. The person who went into that building and the person who's been going into this one. Like the first was real and the second was just what I'd settled for." She looked at Youssef, who had said same bridge both times. They're not separate, she said. I know that now, or I'm starting to. She looked at Cole. Someone told me that. It took a while to land. Cole said nothing, but his expression did something she didn't have a word for, and she looked away before it got complicated. Thank you, she said. All of you, for coming, for looking, for being the reason I have to stop pretending that what I did didn't matter. She sat back down. That's all I've got. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Petra made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and Pruitt said, "Okay," in the specific tone of someone who needed a moment, and Cole put his hand over hers on the armrest of her chair without making anything of it, and the room shifted into the ordinary noise of people moving and talking and refilling coffee, and Griff climbed out from under the chair and put his chin on her knee, and Ranger raised his head and looked at her with his ancient, knowing attention. She put her hand on Ranger's head. He closed his eyes. The pilot launched 2 weeks later. It was small and imperfect, and the first session ran 40 minutes over because Delacroix and one of the ER attendings got into an argument about intubation sequencing that was actually extremely productive and nobody wanted to stop it. The simulation bay was too cold. The scheduling conflict with the departmental meeting had been resolved at the last minute, and not especially gracefully. All 4 of the nursing staff Lena had recruited showed up early. So did Youssef, who had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday morning because that was the kind of person he was. In the second session, one of the ER nurses, a man named Torres, who had been skeptical in the first session, the specific skepticism of someone who had been in civilian trauma long enough to be certain about things, spent 40 minutes watching Delacroix work a simulated blast injury scenario and then said quietly, mostly to himself, "We don't do it like that." "No," Delacroix said, "you don't." "Show me again," Torres said. She showed him again. Lena watched from the corner of the room, holding a clipboard with notes she mostly wasn't writing, and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing working. Not perfectly, not without friction, but actually working. The genuine contact of 2 different competencies finding their overlap. She thought about what Youssef had said. Same bridge, both times. She thought about the years it had taken to understand that the 2 halves of her life were one continuous thing, that the woman who'd gone into a burning building and the woman who caught an aortic dissection on a routine triage shift were not different people but the same person with more years and different terrain. She thought about the cost of the erasure, not just the injury claim, not just the professional record, the cost to herself. The 8 years of treating her own history as something too expensive to carry openly, the careful architecture of invisibility that had kept her safe and also kept her small. The scrubs pulled down, the non-answers, the deliberate forgetting. She'd thought she was protecting herself. She'd also been protecting the people who'd benefit from her being diminished, and she hadn't known it, and now she did. That knowledge was uncomfortable in the way that all useful knowledge was uncomfortable. She wrote it down, not in the clipboard, in her head, the private notation of a person committing something to a record that only she could read. The protection you build around a wound can outlast the wound. Learn to tell the difference. 6 months after the pilot launched, the Crossover Emergency Training Initiative was approved for permanent integration into the hospital's professional development program, with a budget and 2 dedicated training days per quarter and an official partnership with the regional VA medical center that Solka had brokered and Lena had not asked for but accepted. Hale's medical board inquiry concluded with a formal censure and a 2-year supervised practice requirement, not license revocation, which Lena had known was unlikely, but a documented mark on a permanent record with mandatory oversight. The 3 nurses who had left the hospital during his tenure received formal notifications from the board that the inquiry had substantiated concerns about the environment during that period. One of them sent Lena an email that she didn't know how to respond to for 2 days, and then responded to simply, "I'm glad you know. I'm sorry it took this long." Caulfield's situation resolved less cleanly, which was honest. The DoD declined to pursue a full court-martial. He was retired, the events were 8 years past, the institutional will for a prolonged proceeding was limited. What proceeded instead was an administrative separation from his retirement status that stripped certain benefits and a formal notation in the official military record. His name stayed off the hospital wall. His resignation from the board was permanent. It wasn't everything. Lena had known it wouldn't be. The machinery of accountability in large institutions move towards something like justice without ever arriving there cleanly. And demanding a clean arrival was how people drove themselves into the specific bitterness of the permanently disappointed. She took what had happened, measured it against what was possible, and decided it was enough to keep going. She did not forgive him in any formal sense. She just stopped giving the unforgiveness the space it had been taking up. On a Thursday evening in late October, 1 year after a military transport had arrived at Redwood Valley's ambulance bay without advance notice, Lena sat on her apartment floor with her back against the couch, and Griff on one side and Ranger on the other. Ranger was visiting, as he did when Cole visited, which was regularly now, though the organizing of that regularity still had the slightly improvised quality of two people who were better at committing to concrete actions than to abstract states. Cole was in the kitchen doing something with pasta that he claimed would be ready in 20 minutes and had been claiming for 35. She had the commendation on her lap. Not the copy. The original, the one that had been sitting in an archive for 8 years and had been released to her when the record was corrected. The paper was not special. The language was military boilerplate around a set of facts. She'd read it so many times by now that she could recite sections of it. She still read it, not to verify anything, not to check if it was real, just because it existed in a physical form in the world, and there were still days when that required confirmation. Cole came out of the kitchen with 2 plates and looked at her on the floor, and did not ask what she was doing because he knew what she was doing. He set the plates on the coffee table and sat down on the floor beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Ranger put his head in her lap, directly on top of the commendation. "He has no respect for official documents," Cole said. "He's making a point," she said. "What point?" She looked at the dog, at the specific weight of him, warm and real, the animal who had recognized her in a rainy alley and started a chain of events that had ended with her sitting on a floor with pasta getting cold and a future that was still slightly out of focus, but no longer something she was looking away from. "That the paper isn't the thing," she said. "The thing is the thing." Cole looked at her. "The thing," he said. "The work, the people. What actually happened and what's still happening." She set the commendation on the coffee table. "The paper just says so in official language." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Pasta's going to be cold." "It's already cold," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." They ate it cold on the floor with both dogs between them, and it was imperfect and ordinary and exactly what it was, and she stayed in it without flinching, which was something she was still learning and suspected she would be learning for a long time. The scars on her left arm caught the lamplight. She didn't pull her sleeve down. She had stopped doing that mostly. Not in a dramatic way, not as a statement, just the gradual loosening of a habit whose original purpose had been outlived. The scars were there. They mapped something real, a corridor, a weight, a decision made in 3 seconds that had taken 8 years to be entered into the record. They were not a story she owed anyone, but they were also not a story she needed to hide. Outside, the October evening was cool and beginning to darken, and somewhere in the city, Dale Pruitt was probably calling his garage to check in, and Amir Youssef was probably reading something on his phone and disagreeing with it. And in a simulation bay at Redwood Valley Medical Center, Torres was probably arguing with Delacroix about something important, and the work was happening, the ordinary accumulation of skill and contact that was how anything actually changed. She had not become someone different. She had become more completely the person she'd already been, and the difference between those two things was the distance between shame and something like peace. It wasn't a simple distance. Nothing about it had been simple, but she'd covered harder terrain on worse days, and she knew how to move. That was enough. And on the days when it didn't feel like enough, she had was learning, to let someone hand her a plate of cold pasta and stay anyway, which was its own kind of medicine, and one she'd been too self-sufficient to prescribe herself for a very long time. Ranger's tail moved against the floor, slow and certain, like a clock that kept good time. She stayed right where she was.